Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this rather miserable Sunday afternoon. Hopefully, you've not too zoomed out from the last week, and I hope you've enjoyed the summit as much as I have. There's been some amazing sessions with some really inspiring speakers, and I've been so impressed with the whole week. So I would just go to this, and there we go. Excellent. Hopefully you can see the screen. So this is my guide to networking, the what, the why, the how, the challenges and ways to network and not to as well. That will take us through the next hour or so. I'm not going to use breakout rooms, but I want to make this session engaging and to get you involved. Thankfully, we have the chat option. So what I'm going to do is during the course of the session is to ask you some questions, to get you thinking, to try and get the rusty cogs of your mind whirring one last time this week. And at certain points, there'll be a question that I'll put to you. The question will be in red text, just so you know when it's there. And you're welcome to use the chat box to voice your opinions. You can use it to express your immediate instinctive thoughts. Or if you like, you can write the question down, think about it over the course of the next hour and write a more in-depth answer at some point later. Even more alternatively, I'll leave my contact details at the end of the session if you want to have a chat more personally. I'm about to embark on some research with regards to networks and networking, just to give us a proverbial buzz. If you would like to be part of the work that I'm about to do, but enough of the hard sell. It's worth us touching very briefly on what networking actually is. So my first question to you is this: what does it mean to you? Of course, I'm about to effectively tell you, so you can cheat if you like, but what I'm asking you what specifically has been your experience of networking to date so far. So basically, networking is talking to like-minded people, using lines of communication, building up contacts and sharing information, ideas and expertise. The dictionary definition, according to Oxford Languages, or indeed if you Google the words networking definition like I did, is the action or process of interacting with others to exchange information and develop professional or social contracts. A network using the same source is a group of people who exchange information and contacts for professional or social purposes. What I'll shine a light on over the next hour is where and when you can do this. It's a vital part of modern business, and even if you don't consider yourself as being in the same bracket as business people, quote unquote, it's highly likely that you'll have to network at some point during the course of your career. It's even likely that you're doing it right now and you don't even know you haven't even realized it. Anytime you've sent a DM on Twitter to a museum professional inquiring about a project or looking for advice on something, you are networking. If you've attended a drinks reception and got chatting to someone randomer in the queue for the free wine, you are networking and hopefully not slurring words and making too much of a fool of yourself. If you've ever passed a business card on to anyone, you are networking. So why do we network? This is essentially the question I want you to think about. What is the main reason for why you network, and what do you want to get out of it? In other words, what do you consider the best reason to network? There are many reasons, not all of which are applicable at any one time. And it very much depends upon your own personal reasons and motivations for doing so. Well, firstly, one of the main reasons for networking in business is to create opportunities and openings. And even if you're not as business-minded as that, it's still a key reason to do so. The opportunity could be a possible job. It's been estimated, generally speaking, that 60 to 80% of jobs are found through networking with others. Or it could be a partnership or a connection that could add value to your museum in some way. You could be an aspiring freelancer looking for work, or you could be seeking a contractor, exhibition designer, or tech specialist that could help you to improve the visitor offer you provide. Maybe you just want to exchange information and ideas with people. Or maybe you just want to keep up to date with what's going on in the sector. You may be aware of an organization or movement that you would like to know more about, or someone that you could work with. If approached in the right way, the opportunities afforded could prove to be mutually rewarding. In many ways, it's about who you know, and the connections you can create through networking can be beneficial both for you and your workplace. Networking allows you some great connections, both on a professional and a personal level. The more connections you have, the better the chance of referrals you may gain. It's often worth remembering the personal aspect too. Even if you feel you're unable to make a connection work on a professional level, the fact that you're willing to talk to people puts you in good stead and does you no harm at all. And there are personal reasons for wanting to network too. One of the reasons that we all exist within this rather odd community, full of rather odd people, is that Some of the people are actually quite great. Thumbs up from Lou. From people who work in museums and outside of looking for work and seeking professional contacts, networking is a way of making friends. Friendship is an important and sometimes undervalued part of networking. What we want to do is not purely professionally focused, but it also has to be enjoyable. We have to want to do it, and therefore we have to allow ourselves open to the possibility of forging new friendships and friendly relationships. Some of the best friends I have in the sector started from networking, and some of my most rewarding opportunities have emerged from me taking the plunge, engaging with people and getting to know like-minded people. Of course, you won't easily connect with everyone, but stick around and keep trying and you'll soon meet some great people and forge some potentially fruitful working relationships too. Increasing your confidence is a very important reason as well. I will discuss this a bit further a bit later, but networking is not an easy thing to do, especially if you're relatively new to it. And the confidence to talk to similarly minded people about our careers is a skill and a mentality that can be greatly improved through networking. It's especially helpful if we're pushed into talking to a wide range of people, many of whom will have a completely different career and skill set to our own. This also helps to bolster and improve our understanding of the sector, and you never know when that person with whom on the surface you have very little in common would give you advice completely out of left field and alters the way that you think about your role. These connections and contacts are important in ways that may not be apparent at first. Let's not rule out the rather obvious conclusion that networking has self-seeking objectives at its core. And while it makes it sound like a sort of shallow, vain, narcissistic way, I don't use the term self-serving in a negative way as much as it sounds it. I mean it in the same way as you apply for a job, you do your weekly food shop, or you want a nice house to live in. Sometimes you have to put yourself first. And in networking, you have an opportunity to make yourself known, to get your name and your face out there, to develop relationships that could serve you well in the future if you pursue them. It allows you to build up a positive influence, both for yourself and in terms of how others view you. It allows you to grow as a person, and it always helps to surround yourself with the right people in this regard. And finally, as we will find out, networking is a two-way solution. If you are there to get guidance and support as much as you can potentially provide it, you may be seeking assistance about advancing your career or a particular aspect of your role you're currently in, and this may be your impetus for networking or wanting to get in contact with a particular person. You may feel anxious or uncertain about asking for help, but if you approach someone in the right way, they can provide a positive and satisfying hand. And similarly, the satisfaction can work the other way around as well. If someone comes to you for advice, it often feels good to know that you're being sought out for your opinions or expertise. And the fact that you're making something of an impact on someone is very positive. You've earned their respect. And this can help you in the both of you in many ways. So how can we network? There are many, many ways to network, some of which I've already mentioned previously. Of course, we know full well about emails and phone calls, so I hope I don't have to talk too much about them here. But what I'm going to do here is talk about what are, in my opinion, 3 of the best ways to network in 2020 and beyond. The question I want you to answer is, what method of networking works best for you and why? You can say whatever you like, cup and string, semaphore, smoke signals, Morse code, carrier pigeon, anything like that. Just have a couple of seconds to think about that while I have a swig of water and then we'll carry on. So, what you may or may not realize is, if you're engaged in some kind of social media activity, you already have a ready-made network. You're already networking. Look at the number of Twitter followers you have and how many you follow, the number of Facebook friends you have, the number of Instagrammers who follow you, the LinkedIn connections you have. Many of them will be people that you may never communicate with beyond a simple click of the button, the follow button. And quite frankly, no one is expecting you to be intimately acquainted with every single one of them. But you and so many others have taken the time to build up that network, that list of potential contacts, that reputation, and if it doesn't sound too trivial, that online persona that extends far beyond you and your smartphone. Without being too full of myself, I have over 1,800 Twitter followers. I never would have thought I'd had that many, but it extends from New Zealand to parts of the United States that I never even thought about going to before. I'll talk a little bit more about social media in a little while. Next, online video conferencing. Many of us have undergone a major transformation to our working lives over the past few months due to COVID, and one of the more significant aspects of this is the switch to working from home as opposed to going into an office. I'm aware that not all of us have had to make this change, and many of you here today will be working in visitor-facing roles, but chances are that the majority of you will have had to have made at least one online video call in the past few months. Quite frankly, you wouldn't be here today if you hadn't embraced the potential that the medium has to offer, or at the very least, just shruggingly accepted it. How many of you had heard of Zoom 12 months ago? I hadn't, so there we go. There's also not just Zoom, it's just Facebook, Skype, WhatsApp, which chews up the battery on my phone, but it's an option, Microsoft Teams, and many more. Quite what the future for our working lives will be is uncertain because for obvious reasons, and is dependent on a number of variables. When will the vaccine arrive? Will we need to self-isolate again? Will there be any further lockdowns? And how long it will be before we can safely return to something resembling normality? Estimates can guess anything between a few months to a year or so. And the immediate future of this and virtually every other sector is frustratingly fuzzy. But while there are things we will look forward to going back to, the advantages and progress made in remote working are too big to ignore. And it's highly likely that this will become a big part of our working lives from now on. The gains to be made in terms of networking are really great. It will help us to shrink our world and to speed up communication. For example, last Monday, I held an online conference call with a museum professional in Canada over a possible project. We first spoke on the phone via Facebook Messenger on the Wednesday, arranged the meeting on the Thursday, and held the meeting on the Monday. While it does help that I've got quite a bit of time on my hands at the moment, think how differently this meeting would have played out had we not had an easy and convenient means of meeting, basically. I've never been to Canada, and she'd only been to the UK a couple of times. It's obviously not wise to travel long distances right now, of course, and we'd have to think about the cost of international phone calls and all that kind of thing. Think about how that correspondence has sped up the likelihood of a fruitful and successful working relationship through online video conferencing. To coin a term, because why not, it's what I referred to on the slide as telescoped networking. That's just a term I've created for this. So for example, if you're in London and you want to connect with people in Scotland, it's now so much easier to do this. The advantages that this has over in-person networking is obvious. It saves you a lot of time and money to get to networking events, even if the joy and excitement of traveling all over the place and seeing more of the country is removed. Yet while we haven't done much in the way of in-person networking this year, I don't think I've actually seen a museum professional in the flesh since February, apart from the few people I actually work with. It's still a key way to network. In-person networking, meeting up in person, and the newfangled way of video conferencing both have the advantage over the humble telephone call in that you can see people's faces as well as hearing their voice. And this is very important in the tearing down of walls that is essential to effective communication and good working relationships in the sector. Think about this for a second. How many people do you follow on Twitter that you've never met? Then you turn up to a sector networking event, the welcome reception at the Museums Association conference, for example, or even an informal meetup at the pub, a short walk from your work, set up by a local group from museum professionals. You look at the various name tags and introduce yourself, and wow, there's that person whose tweets you've liked, and vice versa. You've exchanged pleasantries online, commented on one of their posts, or they've helped you in some way. And up until now, you had no idea what they looked like or how they sounded. All of a sudden, you put a face to the name, and this is such a key part of building up good networking and relationships with a wide range of people. It's difficult to know exactly when we will get back to in-person networking, but the reason I'm discussing it here is because I genuinely think that we won't abandon this method once we have a vaccine or are able to go back to what normality is when it's safe to. While the pandemic will change certain mentalities and working practices for the better, there are things that we will desire a return to. And just as people will want to go back to the theatre or to football matches or to gigs, video conferencing and social media will never quite capture the same atmosphere or thrill of meeting people in person. Hopefully in a year or so, we'll all be a bunch of museum professionals sitting around a table at a pub, having a couple of drinks and enjoying each other's company, assuming all the pubs are still open, of course, but that sounds like a very tempting offer to me right now. So I've only got a little bit of time to talk about the challenges of networking, so I'm going to discuss a couple in a little more detail, and perhaps we can go about solving these. Not that I have the answers, but I do have insight that could be put forwards at the very least. So my next question for you is quite a heavy one. What are the things that terrify you about networking? And as an addendum, what in your opinion could be done about it? And I'll give you a few more seconds to write down your thoughts if you want to, while I have another swig of water. There's some great comments already, by the way. So I think it will be interesting to hear about what makes people uncomfortable or uncertain about networking, and maybe we can create a few solutions. Just maybe, who knows? One problem is that it takes too much time. I don't know if you can see that quote in full, but anyway. This quote from an article from YFS magazine. YFS stands for Young, Fabulous and Self-Employed, which I find pretty nauseating. But anyway, written by Beth Bridges, who styles herself the networking motivator, and her Twitter details and all that are on the screen. It highlights the biggest networking challenges and states the following about the time involved in networking. I've been extremely active in my community for many years, so I know a lot of people. When I see someone I haven't seen in a while and they want to meet for coffee or lunch, it's hard for me to say no. But as a full-time entrepreneur, every minute you don't spend on client work or getting new clients can feel like it's wasted. I feel this is a related as entrepreneurs. Most of us probably don't. I certainly don't. Networking takes time, and we all have other commitments. Not everyone in the museum sector has a full-time job, of course, but even aside from that, we have families, hobbies, social lives, or at least we did, and other distractions. The timing of networking can be an issue too. With my work with the West Midlands Emerging Museum Professionals Network, we put on a variety of evening events, and we learned things about trying to create a network from local museum professionals. Weekends did not work, for example, as those who worked weekends were obviously busy, and those who didn't were presumably so sick of the thought of museums for 1 week that they needed time away from them, which is fair enough, of course. Similarly, while meetups in the week were more popular and a great opportunity for people to grab a drink, have a vent and a rant, to unwind and to get to know other like-minded people, numbers tend to vary. Bottom line, networking does take a lot of time, and you may wonder why it's worth it. I get that, and I've thought the same every now and again. But a form of selective networking at your pace is absolutely fine. It's your time, and there's nothing wrong with taking time out from it all. Maybe set yourself some goals, a sensible and time-measured timetable for networking. Also, maybe contact one new person a week. Sign up for 2 online meetups a month, something like that. Whatever works for you. Also, start with something small and work up to something bigger. But don't forget to slam the brakes and take a break from it all if you need to. Also, it's okay to be honest with people, and to explain that sometimes you need a break is absolutely fine. The next challenge is more specifically aimed at networking events, online or in person, whatever. And that is that it's actually very difficult and daunting and horrible if you're lacking in self-confidence. And I wonder how many people here today feel the same thing. And as I'm amongst friends here, I'm happy to admit that I've always been a shy person who finds it difficult to start conversations with people. I have friends, I think, I hope, and I'm generally a likable, pleasant person. Perhaps I'm a difficult person to get to know, or I appear a little standoffish or indirect at first. But once that wall is broken down, I'm generally a good person to be around. I like to think I'm fun and funny and engaging and, that kind of thing, maybe. It's a symptom of not being very good at selling myself or getting to know people. And the thought of walking into a networking event or logging onto a Zoom meet can be terrifying, especially if you don't know what or who is on the other side. I've chickened out of Zoom meets because I didn't want to face the awkwardness of making a fool of myself. And I've uncomfortable memories of going into a drinks reception, walking around trying to find someone I knew, then sitting down at the side and faking a headache because I didn't know anyone. And everyone there was too wrapped up in their own conversations. The very idea of interrupting a discussion or sidling up to a random person and introducing myself would have been mortifying. To all those who have similar anxieties, I hear you. And if any of you have found me aloof or impersonal, I can only apologize and hope you understand. So let's create a solution to this stigma. To all those people who want to host Zoom meets or eventually host in-person meetups, Do your bit to encourage people in. You don't have to make it blindingly obvious that you want to reach out to less confident people, but one solution is the idea of an icebreaker, an activity, a quiz, bringing an object along, that sort of thing. The great thing about icebreakers is that it treats everyone exactly the same. And if done the right way, it can really bring people out of their shell. If you're a host, extend out to people, ask them about themselves, engage them, or bring them into your conversation. And you'd be surprised how much that is appreciated and how much it matters that you're showing an interest in them and how it can help to form healthy and lasting friendships. Alternatively, you could contact a host and ask them who's going to be there. If you know at least one person who'll be there, get in touch with them to let them know you're thinking of heading along and that you look forward to seeing them there. It may help to let them know beforehand that you might not know too many people who are going, and this may allow them to bring you into conversations with other people and include you generally. You could also bring a friend along. Or ask around your network to see if anyone is going and tag these along with them. All of this is fine and do not ever feel awkward about doing so. If any of these people are more confident than you, or especially if they know more people than you do, then all the better. It could help, therefore, to get the ball rolling on communicating with certain people. And even if you're regarded to begin with as friend of X, it's a start. And it's then up to you to change that particular tag or get yourself noticed on your own terms. So very briefly, I'm going to list a few examples of support networks and groups that currently exist for museum professionals. So the question I'm going to put to you is this. I'm going to have another swig of water as well because my voice is beginning to go. What networks do you feel you get the most out of and why? And there's also the thrill of a bonus question. What do you feel is missing from the world of museum-based networking? You may need a little bit more time to think about that one. And it's not in any way intended as a slam against any of the groups I'm about to mention. I'm about to sort of lavish praise on all of these. It's always it's always interesting to gauge how the future of museum networking could look. I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about that one. Yeah, okay. I'm aware that throughout the I'll start again. I'm aware that this slide is a bit of a word jumble, which is why I've color coded it to make it a bit more readable. I just wanted to get a lot of information on one screen. So there we go. I'm aware that throughout the week the FMJ Summit has hosted a daily sector support showcase in which groups, networks, and organisations have talked about what they can do for you and how you can get involved. I won't be able to talk about them better than they can talk about themselves. But the good news is that we've been talking just before this, and the FMJ will be putting these sessions online. So whenever they come out over the next few, whenever it is, keep an eye out for them. So if you want to know more about the Arts Marketing Association, Social Heritage Social Media Group, Museum Wellness Network, Space Invaders, Group for Education in Museums, or GEM or GEM or whatever they're called, Heritage Science Forum, Kids in Museums, Heritage Volunteering Group, the Association of Independent Museums, Art Fund, Culture 24, Museums Association, and the Family Arts Campaign. If you want to know more about any of them, or even if one of them sort of piques your interest, have a look out for that. And if there are any other groups or organisations that I've neglected to mention, I apologise. This is not so much an exhaustive list as a few I feel do some really good work. But feel free to name any that you can think of in the chat. I'm aware that many of the networks I'm about to mention are UK based. So if you're based elsewhere, please highlight the work of networks and groups where you are. And if you want to provide links or Twitter handles, whatever, absolutely do that. So let's start with some grassroots groups. I don't need to talk about Fair Museum Jobs. And if you don't know about them, well, what are you doing here? But they've become one of the leading grassroots movements in the museum community and do brilliant work to highlight and call out dodgy recruitment practices. And this week's summit has been tremendous at showing the range of museum careers, how to advance in the sector, and otherwise generally great advice with regard to CVs and interviews and other aspects of museum recruitment. There's also front of house museums whose whole role is to highlight and promote the excellent work the visitor-facing museum staff do in a sector which often overlooks or undervalues or even ignores them. Museum as Muck is an award-winning network made up of working class people who seek to effect positive change and challenge the socio-economic norms and perceptions that are prevalent in the museum workplace. They do some really interesting work to raise uncomfortable questions of privilege and lack of socioeconomic diversity in the sector. And if you missed their session this morning, Social Class and Working Museums, it was really, really interesting. And I actively encourage you to seek it out when it becomes available online, and seek them out, of course. Museum Detox is another very important network for people of colour that work within the sector. Their aim is to challenge the systems and perceptions of inequality that exist within the museum sector, and to work towards building a sector that is reflective of the diversity of its audiences and workforce. They describe themselves on their website as empowered, hopeful, positive, valued, reflective, informed, energized, inspired, motivated, uplifted, connected, invigorated, happy, excited, and joyful. And who can argue with that? The networks I've just mentioned all seek to confront issues head on, to call out dodgy practices, systemic racism, wage inequalities, and the tricky issue of privilege, and indeed white privilege, that need to be highlighted, challenged, changed, and rooted out from the sector. Another one which I haven't put on here, which I thought of just a moment ago, was Museum DCN, which is the Disability Collaborative Network, that is looking towards creating inclusive practice and service provision in museums. So it's the kind of for disability in museums and accessibility in museums in that regard. So I apologize, I haven't put that on this slide, but I've thought of them just now. There's also the Emerging Museum Professionals Networks, as I mentioned earlier. Every region in the UK, apart from Northern Ireland, has a group, and there are numerous groups in North America, New Zealand, and Australia, all of which have either a Facebook or a Twitter page, and some a website or an email address. I didn't put any of them on this slide because it would have been even more words. If anyone's unable to find a group for their region, get in touch and I can try and put you through to them if I know that there is one. The National EMP Network's goal is to engage museum professionals across all stages of their careers in building vibrant communities of networking, knowledge exchange, and resource sharing, and envisions communities in which museum professionals make meaningful connections within and across backgrounds, disciplines, and institutions. Finally, I mentioned one or two support specialist networks earlier, and these are a great way of getting collections-based practice advice, advocacy, support, and guidance in sharing knowledge and understanding of specific collections. Many of the SSNs have clubbed together to form the Subject Specialist Network Consortium, the largest collections support network in the country that, in their own words, forms a unique sector support organisation with a wealth and breadth of specialist knowledge, experience, and skills across a wide range of subject areas. So if you're working with army collections, public art, Egyptian and Sudanese collections, performing arts collections, aviation heritage, British art, Chinese collections, classical collections, contemporary art, ceramics, crime and punishment, and a whole load of others, I'm only up to sea with that one. And if you aren't aware of these networks, you may want to think about becoming a part of one of them. So parts of this session were adapted from a different session I did for Moving On Up, which is the Museums Association's event a couple of years ago in Nottingham. In that, I talked about the do's and don'ts of networking, and rather than lazily repeating myself, I thought I would evolve this section into a more general list of pointers. It's not, and quite frankly, could never be an exhaustive, definitive holy grail of networking. But what I hope it will do is to leave you with some general tips and advice that could allow you to make the most of networking in a successful, fruitful, and even enjoyable way. There's no questions to this bit. We're done with the questions. So, first, a variation on the classic elevator pitch model, often cited as an essential of effective networking. The premise is pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory. Imagine you're in an elevator or a lift with someone you really want to talk to. You don't know the person, they don't know you. You have 30 seconds between the lift doors closing on one floor and then opening on another in which to introduce yourself. So you have to be quick in getting across what you want to before the metaphorical elevator doors open and they move on. So what do you say to them? My variation on this is the Holmes model. This is not a thing. Don't worry about this. Don't look for this online. I have created this literally for the purpose of this. It's got no basis in fact or evidence, but I just thought, have a bit of fun. I could be shamelessly ripping off someone's idea, but it's a laugh, isn't it? So this model, named after myself, is based around this premise. You are person A, and you're talking to person B, the person that you want to connect with. After you've finished talking to person B goes over to person C, an unrelated person. but also someone you could potentially use as a possible contact in the future. And if person C was to ask person B about you, what would you want them to say? Does that make any sense? I hope that makes sense. There are three possible areas for this. Firstly, personality. What aspect of your personality do you want to convey above all else? Or what do you want them to take away that says something about your character? It could be something like generosity or warmth or kindness or sense of humor, enthusiasm, passion, anything like that. If person C was to ask the question, what's person A like? What do you hope that they say in response, person B? If you want to make a positive impression on both those people, a positive personality trait is worth thinking about how you put that across. Secondly, work. What aspects of your work and career do you want the take-home message to be? To break this down further, you could think about it as either a past, a present, or a future about you. Maybe you did something you were really proud of in the past that you want to brag about. Maybe you're doing some work right now that really inspires or invigorates you, that you may want to know, they may want to know more about. Or it's possible that you have a big plan for the future, a big idea or a possible project or something that they may be able to help you with in some way. It's very much bespoke and it's dependent on the person that you want to communicate with. But it's the basis of a potentially successful working relationship and something to begin to think about. The third one is not the most essential, but it's worth thinking about as a backup if nothing else. Think about what you do outside of work and how this can act as a good way to make a lasting impression on someone. And we all have interests outside of work. And it's these interests that humanize us. None of us are totally obsessed with our careers and nothing else, and our interests and hobbies make us relatable, more rounded, more grounded, and in some cases, more interesting as individuals. So think about an interest or a hobby that could be an interesting talking point, maybe an extracurricular activity, a sport you take part in or something like that, a TV show you watch, a film you like, a football team you support, something like that. Do you have a cat? That kind of thing. It's a useful alternative when a conversation goes a little flat, an opportunity for you to show an interest in people beyond what they can offer you work-wise. And if you can adeptly weave this into a conversation, you could be onto a winner there. I mentioned social media earlier, and I'll come back to it. There are differing opinions as to the influence of social media on our ability to network effectively, and the issue of how professional should we look on these platforms. There are those who use social media as a purely professional tool, and that's fine if it works for you. Some people have a separate personal and professional profile as a way of separating the two, their work and their personal lives. And again, if you can keep on top of this, it could be a good way around it. But try not to confuse the two. I am reminded of a former colleague who tweeted, "I love hummus" on her Twitter work Twitter as opposed to her personal, which good for her. Others, such as Sasha Coward, do not bother with this. If you don't know Sasha, he's a brilliantly positive presence on Twitter and the museum community. And he's got like 20,000 followers, so I imagine most of you already do, but definitely follow him if you don't. I heard him speak at a careers event a few years ago, and he said he did not want to come across as super professional on Twitter, mainly because he's not that sort of person, but also because his personality is his quote of inverted commas, selling himself. His online persona is quirky, silly, funny, and unique to him. So why should he try to be anything else? And I tend to side with Sasha on this debate. Although things like LinkedIn, for example, would not apply to this debate, as that is a tool used purely for professional purposes. As for Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or Snapchat or even this TikTok thing that the kids are all crazy about right now, these act to many within your network as a window into your life, for better or worse. Interesting hobbies and character quirks are generally fine to convey on social media, but you always need to be careful as to how you come across. And stuff you post or retweet could come back to haunt you if you're not careful. Many of us have been on social media for many years, of course, especially those of us who were students at the time, and there were plenty of dodgy photographs from days of yore to embarrass us. That good-looking long-haired youth on the left once had dreams and ambitions, and God knows what happened to him. And on the right picture, the most embarrassing thing is those trousers I'm wearing, and I've got no excuse or no explanation for them. But anyway, perhaps the most diplomatic way to manage your social media is to think about it in this way. Take a look at your Twitter page, your Instagram, Facebook, whatever. It doesn't even have to be anything more than a quick cursory glance. But while you're doing this, ask yourself if this is the you that you want other people to see. Most of you will do this and decide that you do not need to change anything. And that's fine. And I would never want to encourage self-censorship or burning the evidence or even acting like someone that you're not, and nor should you. But social media being as open as it is, it's always worth approaching your output with a sensible head. And this could save you from an awkward situation where you have to justify saying the wrong thing or sharing contentious material. When your finger hovers over the send button, just have a think about whether you really want to share this with your network. You know, you may cause offense, they may be taken out of context. And every now and again, you may just hold back or decide not to. And you may thank yourself. One of the absolutely essential rules of networking, figuratively speaking, there are no written rules as such, is that it is a two-way conversation. And this is important to consider when seeking to build up your network and create good relationship with people. When you are reaching out to someone, consider that you could be of service to them in the same way as they could be to you, especially if your motivation for networking is a professional one. If, for example, you're looking for freelance work, or if you're working on an exhibition or project and seeking advice or help, you can help them as much as they can help you. And it's important to bear this in mind. Selfish people who are only looking for what they can get out of a contact will be found out pretty quickly. And if you're able to demonstrate generosity and openness and a willingness to help others out, it can contribute not only to a more successful short-term results, but also effective, long-lasting friendships and relationships. That line in Jerry Maguire, for example, help me, help you. Networking is a give and take process, so never use it as an opportunity just to big yourself up. Perhaps the use of networking as a means to finding work is somewhat overstated, but there is still a right and a wrong way to go about this. Humility, positivity, unpretentiousness, and a good sense of humor are always much valued attributes, and they're far more likely to impress people than arrogance or overconfidence. There's a thin line between being positive and just being cocky, and finding that halfway point is a challenge that can be achieved both through practice and a strong sense of self-awareness as well. Besides, who likes people who only talk about themselves? They're just the worst, so don't be that person. Show an interest in other people. If they're asking questions about you, ask questions back. Maybe attempt to rephrase a question every now and again so it's not just a what about you. Listening is such an important part of this, and showing an interest in others and what they do is a great way of being of service to people in the future. Not only should you avoid being overconfident or arrogant, but you should look to avoid being too negative as well. There's nothing wrong with being self-deprecating to a point, but constant negativity does not exactly put you in good stead and will only begin to grate on people. It doesn't pay to have a constant chip on your shoulder. We all know working in a museum is tough right now. I get that. So why bother? Although you may not think it, you have so much to be positive about, and you may have plenty of openings to present yourself as an honest, optimistic, open and enthusiastic person. You have plenty to talk about in terms of your work, but also outside of work. Achievements to be proud of, but also much that will be of interest to others. And to be quite honest, anyone who meets you for the first time has no idea what you perceive your flaws to be. So there's no reason why you should tell them, unless you want to, of course. One very important aspect of networking is creating useful connections with the people who matter to you, or to those who could be of service to you and them. Finding the right connection is a challenge, but here's a tip. Find out a little about the people before you contact them, without engaging in extensive note-taking or spying or compiling dossiers or anything like that. This isn't the Secret Service. It's worth having a look at LinkedIn profiles or Twitter feeds, but also a museum's website. If they're a freelancer, they probably have their own website. If they're putting themselves out there in that way, there's no harm in utilizing those resources back to gain the information, contact details, or approach you need to get what you want. It may be a case of finding out what people do for a living, perhaps their career progression, and even the things that interest them. And once you have this, you have what you need to create the beginnings of a conversation that can stimulate and engage this interest. This helps you to avoid the copy and paste message as much as possible. And I've found from experience from looking for freelance work that a simple "Dear Sir" or "Madam" type message does not get you very far. So where possible, demonstrate an awareness of them and their work. There are do's and don'ts of writing cold emails. I'm not going to go into them too far here. They may have written an article or been involved in a project that you'd like to know more about. There is nothing wrong with being more direct and complimentary if possible. And this can help you into a conversation with them. Perhaps not worth saying, I looked at your LinkedIn profile before in order to find things to talk to you about. That's a little bit weird. But prior research is nonetheless presented as an example of more direct networking. And if you know these people you want to talk to before you do so, then that might help you. The penultimate tip I'll give you is based around what to do after you've made that initial connection with someone, following through and establishing a stronger relationship with them. To ensure that the work you have put into the initial networking does not go to waste, it's definitely a good idea to contact them as a reminder a little further down the line. Quite how you do this, as well as the frequency of your correspondence, depends largely on how you've made that connection in the first place. If you've attended an in-person event or taken part in a Zoom call, it's likely that email addresses and Twitter profiles, Twitter handles, phone numbers, LinkedIn requests, even a Facebook friend request will be thrown around and exchanged. What you need to do with this is to send them a message or an email, just to remind them who you are and to thank them for allowing you to get in touch with them, as well as for giving you their time. If you had an interesting conversation with them, be grateful for it. And as an aside, one essential of effective networking that I once fell foul of to one particular person's annoyance was always say thank you. If there was something about them or something that interested you, or if there was a part of a conversation that sparked a thought or an idea within you, it's your opportunity to get a dialogue going with them. It has a dual impact of demonstrating a curiosity and an interest in their work, but also shows that you were paying attention. Otherwise, if you've already been in touch with someone, either via email or via a conversation in your Twitter DMs or whatever, it's always worth sending a reminder, especially if you were discussing a work opportunity or a project and the conversation went a bit quiet. This is, of course, natural, as we all have other things to do. But if there is a potential for a productive working relationship, it is always worth pursuing it until you feel that it's a dead end. And there are, of course, right and wrong ways to go about this. If you've already spoken to them, but especially if you're contacting them for the first time, personalize the message. Be cordial, remind them who you are, and be clear and direct in what you want to talk to them about. And also, do not bombard them with correspondence. There's no need to be overbearing, and there are fewer worse ways to present yourself than by doing this. Be patient with people's replies as well. We've already established networking as a slow burning process, and it takes time to forge effective relationships. So if you do not hear back from them, maybe leave it a week or two before sending them a reminder, but don't make a habit of it. If you don't hear back from them after a couple of correspondences, leave it. They're not likely to respond by now, and you'll only raise your own anxieties by doing so. Finally, 2 basic points. Network regularly and don't give up. I say this not to tell you to network every single minute of the day. You need time for yourself, your loved ones, pets, hobbies, mental health, downtime, and all that. But rather to allow you the time to get it right, or at least to understand how you and you alone can network in a way that works for you. Effective networking is an art form of sorts, and of course it arrives more naturally to some than it does to others. Perhaps the best way to think about this is that this session is a springboard rather than a list of set in stone rules that you must obey at all costs. I can tell you what I think is the best way to network, but I can't do it for you. It's up to you to find what works for you. And also, if I can be so bold, to make your own mistakes and to learn from them. Good social skills and the ability to communicate can be a long, drawn out process to hone and fine tune. And at the end of the day, it's your personality, your skill set, your interests, and your ambitions that you are looking to convey. But what you can do is leave yourself open to networking as often as you can. And that's the best way to find what works for you. And in this, you can discover your own, coining another term, networking niche, not a niche network, that's a different thing. Consider this for a second. Look through your emails and the ways in which people start off and sign off their emails. Like, dear sir or madam, hello, hi, regards, kind regards, best wishes, best, etc. It's only a small thing, but it acts as an interesting insight into how people have approached and networking and adapted it to their personality, their approach to work, and you could argue in some ways their outlook on life. Some go for the super formal, some the chattier, some wishing you well, some more passive. The point is that the people you have been in contact with have settled on a form that sums them up and that they feel comfortable with. So how would you want to sign off your emails? Formally, informally? It's something to think about. It's even true with which name you choose to use. So if I've got in touch with someone for the first time, I'll invariably use my full name. If I'm doing something important, I'll probably use the dreaded Matthew. If I'm in touch with someone that I've either been in contact with before, or who I know personally, I'll bring it down to a Matt. And if there's a possibility that it's a quick knockoff email, a brief response, or a confirmation of some kind, I may just even type M and leave it at that. And that's just one small way in which you can view networking as an ongoing series of trial and error until you're settled on what works fine for you, and what makes you come across as interesting, approachable, and worth keeping in contact with. So there we are. Thank you for turning up, for listening, and for contributing if you have. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I want to hear from you, and if you want to have further conversations about networking and what you want from them, if you have any longer answers that you want to give, but you still want to do that, you can contact one of these. And let's create a more open and more supportive and friendly support network in the museum sector. Not that we're not trying already, but let's do something about it. So here are my contact details. Personal email first, brand new shiny work email in the middle, and my Twitter and Instagram handle is on the bottom. And just bear in mind there's an underscore at the bottom of it. There is a Matimer who, without an underscore, who is completely unrelated. He's some bloke in the US who has 60 followers, and a profile picture of him holding up some kind of flatfish, I think a halibut or a flounder or something. I don't know, don't care. But thank you for listening and taking part, and get in touch. And if you want any questions answered or want to continue the conversation, please do. Thank you.
Hi, I will come back in just now. Thank you so much. That was so much information and a lot being shared in the chat. So what I do just want to tell everyone before we start answering any questions is that you can all individually save a copy of the chat so that you can keep everyone's details and everything you need. You'll see in where the chat box is a box with 3 dots for more. If you click on that box, you will see a save chat option, and I would strongly encourage you to save that chat because there's so much stuff in there. We will be saving it at our end and sharing resources, but that might take a while. So if you want the resource right now, do save the chat before you leave the meeting. If anyone has any questions to put in, please do. Everyone's sharing their handles and stuff, which is great. This is networking. Please do that. And I'm just going to scroll through and see if there are any questions in here that from earlier that I might have missed. But while I'm scrolling, I wonder if you could reflect at all on if someone wanted to make, what's an easy first step?
I think I mentioned it earlier, so it may not have been one of the big take-home points, but I think start small. Create a sort of timetable for yourself, but don't give yourself too much to do. Maybe sort of think about how you can structure something. Like if you want to get in touch with a load of people, maybe sort of start with 1 a week or something like that, and sort of think about what you want to say to them. It's like I say, the sort of the very quick take-home points of what's the quickest way to sort of put yourself across to people, and what do you want them to know in that time. Often bombarding people with too much information just makes people switch off. So it's all about how you can forge that link in the sort of easiest way possible, in a way. I mean, right now the obvious solution is to use online resources. So we have Twitter and email and LinkedIn and all this kind of thing. We have all those kind of things, and it's the kind of you also have to think about what you want out of it and what you can provide for other people. So have a think about that. Maybe realize I think if you go into making contact with people without knowing what you want to get out of it, then they may wonder what the point of it is. But if you're clear and direct with that, I think that's a good start.
Excellent. And another question that's come in advance. We're not really thinking too much about this at the moment because we're all doing all of our stuff online.
Yeah.
So this isn't so much a question, but when we come back to actually being able to see people in person, what's a way that you can exit a conversation when you've sort of done your bit of networking, like you've met someone, you've had the conversation, you've got something. How do you leave?
That is a good question. Obviously, there's ways not to do that, which is to be kind of rude and kind of just to sort of make it clear that you've sort of outlived your usefulness. And I've probably done this too much in the past of sort of trying to find a convenient way out of it. I think it's just if you have to get away from something, it's just being polite. But very often what I found is that you may be talking to someone and then the conversation will sort of naturally break up, or people will kind of come and join you or whatever. So it's sort of trying to be sort of trying to be diplomatic, but also being polite if you want to do that. You may sort of say, oh, I need to go over here and do something like that. But it's always being doing it in a sort of fairly polite way. You're asking me this straight off the bat, and I'm sort of trying to think about the constructive way of doing it, really.
There's a good suggestion in the chat, actually. Try and think of someone else in the room who they might like to meet and introduce them to someone else. And
yes,
then
that's very good.
Yeah. Have you met Matt?
Yes, and it's like I say, you're not going to be talking to one person all the time, and if there's people milling around and everything, people will join you, and conversations will sort of get bigger and smaller and all this kind of thing. And it's just sort of knowing that as well. And I think probably one of my problems is sometimes when you realise that a conversation is you're losing interest in it, sort of looking around while talking to someone and trying to find someone else to talk to. If you can do that in a way that doesn't make you look like you're just bored of the conversation, that's a skill as well. So I would suggest, like you say, sort of going, oh, have you met this person? And when it becomes obvious that it's kind of a tough skill to negotiate, but there's a suggestion.
Got another question. Say if you feel that you don't have much knowledge or experience, how can you network without feeling guilty about not having enough to give the other person?
Well, I think that what could you offer them in the future? Maybe I think that's a way to look at it. I mean, not everybody has stuff right now, and when I talked about the sort of the past, the present, and the future, someone might have something that they're hoping to do in time that they're not doing right now, and that is people will respond to that. That kind of, you have that ambition to do something and that sort of willingness to advance, and maybe sort of when you follow up the conversation, you may say, I'm thinking about doing this and maybe of service to you. I don't think it's a case of saying I don't have anything to offer you, therefore I can't. But it's sort of thinking 2 steps ahead and how you can potentially be of contact of use to people in the future, maybe.
I think as someone, like, I've been in the sector a little while, and I do get people who I don't really know, who are early career people, getting in touch with me. I would say, actually, the thing that you're offering me is a chance to share what I know.
Yes.
And let's not pretend we're all selfless human beings. We feel good about sharing what we have, and sometimes that's enough. And knowing that later you're probably going to be my boss means that I get something from that, knowing that you're there in the sector. And obviously from a fair museum jobs perspective, I want to get as many different perspectives in my circle of people so that I can do better work. And I think sometimes that's enough. But something I would really want to say that came up in all the sessions is that all of us need to internalize the idea that we are enough as an individual human. Whatever you're doing, it's enough. And you kind of, there is a confidence thing there that's difficult, but whatever you have to offer is really valid.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think I touched on that again briefly. That negativity doesn't really get you anywhere, and if you say, oh, I want to do this, and it's going back to sort of classic sort of putting yourself down as saying, when someone says, oh, I'm only doing a front of house job. Well, no, you're not only doing a front of house job. Or if you are doing a front of house job, what do you want to be doing? And people are happy to help you with that conversation. And it's also careers advice as well. It's not just getting work, it's getting the advice or the contacts which may help you further down the line as well. There's a lot of other ways to think about that as well. I mean, it's not just getting work, it's the sort of how do you get in the work and the information you may need for that as well.
Got another question. If you've made an online contact relationship through any method, not any, but a legitimate one, how can you sustain that conversation after you've become a contact initially?
It's keeping in sort of semi-regular touch. I mean, not like every day or anything like that, but it's not just a case of your use has sort of fulfilled itself, therefore I never need to talk to you again. And things like Twitter are good for these sorts of things. Even if you're sort of commenting on, or you've made it obvious that you know that people still exist and they know you still exist. You don't have to be sort of emailing each other or catching up on everything. You can do that, but there's other ways you can sort of keep that sort of fire burning in a way, even if it's you're not working together or you're not doing anything. And often contacts you've made which don't prove to be fruitful doesn't mean that you sort of just abandon them and leave them and never talk to them again. You can still keep in touch with them, and people are happy to have that. And things like social media are great for if someone posts something on Twitter and you can respond to it and it shows that you're still there, basically.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly, I think, what I would say. You don't have to be trying to keep every contact on primed for when you need them all the time, especially as you say on social media. You can just sometimes reply to people if they say something that's of interest, or if you remember that they're working on an area, you can tag them in something you think they might be interested in, and that's a way of showing that you're kind of thinking of what they're doing, which shows you're kind of engaged with them as a human, I suppose.
Absolutely. And it's not just the work side of it, it's the sort of appealing to people as humans as well, and as people, and we don't just talk about work all the time, we talk about other things, and having stuff to talk about outside of that always helps as well.
Absolutely. All right, I think we're going to have to bring it to a close. Please, everyone, save the chat now. I'm going to end this meeting in like a minute, so save the chat now while you can. I'll give everyone a moment to do that. And a big thank you to Matt for that insane amount of information that you've provided us with.
Thank you for tuning in as well, everyone.
And don't forget, this recording will be available sometime in the next few weeks, or give or take a few weeks. So thank you, everyone, for spending some of your Sunday afternoon with us. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.